me, Aaron, who will tell you a little bit about the wealth of information which can be conveyed by light and sound, and Sachin, who will speak on the human systems which process these media in complex ways. Then I'll come back to touch on the applications of this. Thank you. Aaron?
The information we receive at every sensory instant affects us. A high or low temperature makes us feel warm or cold. A narrow comfort range exists, and beyond those ranges, we experience discomfort. This is the kind of thinking that's encapsulated in building codes which are handed over to architects in their first few weeks in architectural college. Based on these building codes which specify comfort ranges, we are supposed to design spaces, much like the solar one. So they mention luminosity levels, temperature levels, the amount of fresh air a person needs. But it's not so simple, because if you take a look at everyone in the same room, there are people wearing different levels of clothing and seem to be comfortable at that level. So how comfortable you are depends on what you've eaten, when the last time you ate was, how well you slept last night, what you did today, where you're coming from. And so as architects get into graduate school here at Harvard, one of the first few experiments that building scientist Salman Craig carries out is where he calls a student up to the front and requests him to put his two hands into two different trays of water. This is a thermograph, so it's captured on an infrared camera, where you can see in the right tub the water is cold, so you can find by a deep blue. In the left tub the water is really hot, so you can find by a bright red. And there are two central tubs which have neutral temperature water. The student places his hand in these two extremely tubs, and so naturally his right hand is getting cold, his left hand is getting warm. And then in a while, Salman asks him to take out his two hands and place it in the central two tubs and tell him what temperature he experiences. So pay attention to what happens when he takes off his two hands. You see his right hand is cold, it's a colder temperature, his left hand is now warm. So as he puts it into the neutral tubs, his right hand starts absorbing heat, his left hand starts giving out heat. And so when he's asked to tell the temperature of these two tubs, he says that the right one is warm and the left one is cold. But in fact, it's both the same temperature. So we don't really experience temperature, we experience the heat flux moving in and out of our bodies. Humans hold very little absolute experience. We ground our perception in these relative sensations. ASHRAE is an international society that defines standards for the maintenance of indoor environments. The purpose of ASHRAE is to define indoor conditions that will satisfy at least 80% of the occupants. Now, architects and building scientists use these codes while designing spaces. It was, for a while now, these standards were based on interior conditions, and only in 2010 that they introduced the adaptive comfort model, which takes not only the interior air and surface radiant temperature into consideration, but also the exterior temperature. So in this graph, this whole blue passage means comfortable. The red dot signifies where you are. As you see right now, a person is uncomfortable because it's 28 degrees centigrade in the interior, but on the outdoors, it's about 18 degrees centigrade. If you shift this to a scenario in which it's still 28 degrees on the interior, but outdoors is 30 degrees, the person feels quite comfortable indoors. So coming back to the thermograph, you see the different parts of the body is at different temperatures. This is a thermal strategy that the body uses to inexpensively maintain the core body temperature, while simultaneously safeguarding you from shocks you might experience as your extremities goes about touching everyday objects around you. Very rarely are you in a space where you're uniformly thermally communicating with the rest of your environment. You're losing and gaining heat through convection, but also primarily through radiation, which is the radiated temperature of the walls, the floor, the ceiling, and each one is communicating with you in a slightly different manner. The last time you were truly in an environment which was uniform all around you, in which every part of your body was uniformly communicating with this environment, was when you were in your mother's womb. Because though the extremities of our bodies move to different temperatures, our core body, where the uterus lies, remains at a uniform temperature. So you were born in an amniotic bath of 98.6 Fahrenheit, and that's why your core temperature exists at 98.6 Fahrenheit. So your mother's core temperature remained constant even when she moved through different environments. A somewhat close simulation of that experience would be when you immerse yourself in a bathtub, which is probably why it feels so soothing. And the only time a baby might actually experience a different temperature is if you, while it's still in the womb, is if you take an extremely hot or cold object and touch it against the mother's stomach. It's very likely then that this rare fluctuation in sensation would make the baby respond by kicking out. So the womb is more of a place of unexperience. It's dark, it's uniformly heated, you're not breathing, suckling, or swallowing since all your vital nutrients are coming in via your placenta. And the amniotic bath around you muffles out sounds and keeps you buoyantly floating. Then the moment you leave the womb, you're thrown out into a rich world of contrasting sensation. You see light and dark, you feel hot and cold, you hear sound, you also hear silence. You feel the burning breath of air in your lungs, and you feel the weight of gravity in your bones. What we experience through the world around us, we do through our physiological senses. Physiological because our senses are made up of interconnected systems that don't just receive information but also interpret it. And we have a lot more than the famous five. Proprioception gives you the ability to tell where one body part is with respect to the other. Before breath analyzers came into play, one would struggle to bring this sense into use when you pulled over and asked to close your eyes and touch your nose. But we use the sense all the time, every day, when we go and reach out to scratch a body part without looking at it. Chemoreceptors detect blood-borne hormones and drugs. They're involved in the vomiting reflex, which safeguards you from a poisonous substance. Magnetoreception is the ability to tell the Earth's magnetic field and the sense of direction. It's somewhat diminished in humans, but if you have a metallic implant, it's likely that you show much better magnetoreception than another individual. Now, time, there's no one mechanism which has been identified as the chief perceptor of time. However, experimental data has conclusively shown that infants are better at short-term timekeeping than adults. Infants are able to tell the passage of 3 minutes without counting up to plus minus 5 seconds. Some species of animals are able to sense and interpret the world in ways that humans cannot. Aquatic or amphibious creatures ranging from the shark to the duck-billed platypus thrive by interpreting electrical signals and variations in water pressures to identify and track down their prey. Electroreception is substantially diminished in airborne and landborne creatures, which makes sense because air is lack conductive of electricity as opposed to water, especially salty water. Homing pigeons or birds have great magnetoreception. They incorporate this into their complex GPS system to navigate across the Earth by checking the Earth's different magnetic signatures. So if you were to strap a magnet onto a pigeon's back, which overpowers the Earth's magnetic signature, it would no longer be a homing pigeon. It wouldn't be able to find its way around. Interestingly, even within the same species, equipped with more or less the same sensorial apparatus, we all intake and interpret the stimuli in slightly different ways, depending on our genetic traits or just how tuned in we are to our systems. So when we hear a sequence of notes, we're able to tell whether one note is a higher frequency or a higher or low pitch with respect to the other. But if you increase that gap, and you hear the note after a long period of time, which note was it? Was it the first, second, or the third? Anyone? You say second? You're first? Okay. So it was the second. Now, when we say someone has absolute pitch, it's more an act of cognition because they have the same sensorial system as us. and it involves the memory of a frequency. Just as we learn to label blue to a particular spectrum of light, people with absolute pitch have learned to label certain frequencies. Now, this may be due to a dominant genetic trait, but it's also heavily influenced by just how exposed you are and how sensitive you decide to be to sound, and also the culture in which you're raised. So, people who speak more tonal languages, like Chinese or Vietnamese or Mandarin, are better at absolute pitch. This is because the tonal language relies on distinguishing some words just based on tone, and the same words will otherwise be indistinguishable if said in the same monotonous manner. So it's little wonder then that bats, wolves, turtles, and birds have absolute pitch. Because of the complete absence of words, it's specific pitches that they use to communicate to one another within the same species. So the creation of language and words has in some ways diminished our sensitivity to sound, but not for this level. It's not just sound that we've grown a little dull to. You all know the sensation of entering a dark room. Some of you all may be accustomed to closing your eyes for a few seconds so that when you open it, the room seems brighter. So, prior to World War II, when night vision goggles came into play, snipers who shoot long distance would ensure that they would read maps only with the red light, because the red light doesn't bleach out your roads to prevent you from seeing into the darkness and darkness. So even while camping, it's essential to carry a red light as opposed to a white light, because if you suddenly drop your white light, you won't be able to see anything in the darkness. Because the white light tends to bleach out your rods and diminish your ability to see in the dark. Like I mentioned, over the last century, building codes that dictate luminosity levels have led to uniformly lit spaces that rarely tap into the full sensorial palette that our extremely developed eyes can offer. There's very little attention to light, shadow, and hue as you move through these buildings. As a result, our eyes are dragged to a monotonous experience, which is far below the tremendous caliber of our visual system. In In Praise of Shadows, Kamizaki writes about the sensory delight that places of varying luminosity can offer. He talks about beauty being brought forth not just through illumination, but also through darkness. What you see is also shrouded in the mystique of what you cannot see. There's beauty not just in the thing itself, but in the patterns of shadows, light, and darkness that one thing against the other creates. We can all appreciate the play of light and shadow when on the stage against the contours of a dancer, but we tend to strip away the sensual experience of our everyday work environments by flooding them in uniformly lit, bright white lights. So an environment devoid of contrast is an unexperience, a sort of opposite unexperience as opposed to the mood. The very experience of sensation is actually a deformation in our sense systems as we transfer from different physical environments. So, does beauty lie in the eye of the beholder? We can look at some examples from Harvard Medical School very old magazine, where they write that artists tap into the circuitry of our visual system to achieve special effects, writes Elizabeth Auditory. Visual art is made for the human eye because it synchronizes with our visual system, how our visual system thinks and works. Artists' astute observation skills enables them to employ the tools of their trade to stimulate the brain's visual circuitry to create illusions. Depth on a plane, movement in a static plane, emotions in an empty space. Illusions are created when different pathways of our visual system see a work of art differently and sends different messages to the brain. The friction and communication between our sense pathways creates illusions that move and manipulate us. John Gordon of neurosciences at Harvard has made it his life's work to study how artwork such as this Asian ink takes advantage of the visual system, complex wiring to give depth and richness in what is otherwise just black ink on paper. So the retina is like a biological computer that has many distinct functional layers that process information. How a spot moves, where a spot is, what the surrounding light is, what the surrounding color is, and they send this different information to your brains. So your brain and your eyes continuously comparing and contrasting and communicating. And what you see depends just as much on the surrounding as it does on the object. So in this particular slide, these two gray bars, is it the same color or is it different? Same color? The rest of you say different. It's actually different. What about here? Is this a uniform line or is it a gradient? Uniform? Yeah, it's uniform. What about this? Is this a uniform line or a gradient? Gradient? Yes, it's gradient. Same color, different? Same. It's the same color. So in viewing palm blossoms by moonlight, 13th century artist Juan creates mountains that seem to loom dark and forbidding against the pale sky. Now if you look at the heart of the mountains, look at the interior, the inner portions of the mountain, the inner portions of the mountain down here. It's actually the same shade as the sky itself. But your eye knows that these are mountains. And so you work to fill in more color into the mountains and see them darker picture. Now if you had just presented a dark set of mountains to you, you wouldn't have to work to interpret this piece of art and fill it in and do the work yourself. So when you see this image, you're not just seeing a recreating to reconstruction. Interestingly, it works the same way for colors. The red that you see in the center has just as much to do with the green around it that does to do with the red inside. That's the same red over here. Now, Claude Monet was an artist that reveled in making the visual system and the brain struggle and argue. Color is described in three components. Wavelength, also called hue, saturation or how free a color is from the white and mixture, and brightness, which is also called luminance in science, or value in art, which means the amount of electromagnetic radiation being reflected on a particular pigment. Now, the older part of our visual cortex in the brain, which we share with the majority of other mammals, registers only luminance, not color. When we look at this painting, Monet uses an orange sun that has the same relative brightness as the blue haze surrounding it. So in this particular picture, the sun that we see in orange is a different hue. So the newer pathway of our brain sees the sun and sees the sky. But the older pathway of our brain, which still exists, sees only sky. They can't see the sun because the luminance of the sun and the sky is the same. So although it might seem that the sun is the brightest spot on this canvas, it is in fact, when measured with a photometer, the same brightness as the sky. Dr. Margaret Livingstone, a professor of neurobiology at Harvard, says, if you make a black and white copy of impression sunrise, the sun will disappear. So we pass this image to a photometer, which measures the amount of light being reflected from every part. The sun tends to disappear, which is probably what makes this picture so captivating. Now, the effect is going to be much more powerful when you're standing in front of the real image rather than the projection of it, because light reflected off a pigment is different from light which is reflected off this white screen. So when a person looks at this image, some part of his brain says the sun is not there, another part of his brain says the sun and its reflection is there, which is what makes the sun so magnetic. Different pathways of your visual system are making you argue with each other. And for some people, they tend to see the sun shimmering in the sky as different pathways take prominence. The sun is there and not there, and therefore it shimmers. Now, artists work hard to be artists. They are astute observers and sensitive souls. They don't just have to create, but they have to simultaneously recreate their work by perceiving it again from the outside. The same could be said about writers and musicians. A writer thinks fluidly without words. Then he has to elicit his thought out of your head through a sequence of external words. Musicians hear first without actually hearing from the inside. Then they have to create a piece of music from the outside and perceive it again from the outside. As I mentioned, this particular painting, which would be more striking if you were to stand in front of the actual painting rather than the projection of it. Art cannot be separated from its medium and its materiality. The information embedded in art is embedded in the materiality of the medium, be it a word, a pigment, a piece of stone, or a plot of glass. So artists, musicians, and writers have been physically informing us, physically inscribing in us, and moving us for a while now. And the more masterful an artist, the more physical a response he can elicit from you. Let's take a look at how bumblebees are but buzzing artists.
Some bumblebee populations are in decline. A tragedy since they are among the few bees capable of buzz pollination. This technique is the only efficient way to pollinate plants like tomatoes, eggplants, and blueberries. The bumblebee grabs a flower by the anthers, decouples its flight muscles from the wings, and uses them to shape the flower violently. The only way to get the blossom to dislodge its pollen. Which the bumblebees bring back to their colony.
So, if you missed it, it said that there are some plants which can only be pollinated through mass pollination, in which pollen can be released only through the buzz of the bumblebee. But it's not the bumblebee, it's its buzz.
A tuning fork will do.
In areas of varying low, high oxygen, we feel drowsy or hurt. The food we eat influences how energetic or fit we feel. We break up that food and release free energy through breath. So in the absence of heat, air, or food, we will perish. What about in the absence of light and vibration? Thomas Hutchin, Gabriel and I began this journey when NASA put out the Space Challenge. We zoned in on the issue of circadian dysregulation. And the circadian clock, or circadian rhythm, is what allows most living beings to synchronize some of their biological functions with the 24-hour cycle of day and night. Astronauts aboard the ISS experience an average of 2 hours less sleep per day. Accumulate that over months, and it leads to serious medical illnesses such as strokes or even heart failure. In fact, the most commonly used drug in space is benzodiazepines to produce sleep. But these drugs knock you out, they don't actually give you a sound quality sleep. One of the main reasons why astronauts cannot sleep is that they are decoupled from the biphasic stimulation of the sun. As they sit aboard the ISS observatory, gazing out into the unknown, they see about 16 sunrises and sunsets in one 24-hour cycle, because the speed of revolution around the Earth is every 90 minutes. So we started off this talk by saying that the information in every sensory instant affects us. But it would be more precise to say that the information signal we receive in every instant sustains us, and that variations in that signal holds the ability to affect us. Rather, what we consider to be the ideal of us, because we are made up of the energies that we dissipate. So we've taken a look at how light and sound has been used and employed over millennia intuitively to harness physical responses. It's time we consider light and sound as a clinical modality to see if we can actually tune our circadian rhythm. With that, I'll hand it over to Sachin, who will take you through the architecture of the human system and how we actually interpret light and sound. We're doing a short question now, okay, on Sachin. Okay, question.
More of a comment in hopes of a comment from you. I read somewhere years ago with regard to the circadian rhythms that in fact humans are most comfortable when they go to bed with the sun, when they get up with the sun. And it actually helps better if they don't stumble around and hurt themselves on rocks in the middle of the night and they don't have light. And it's sort of prehistoric man actually lived in that kind of cycle, going to bed with the sun, getting up with the sun. That's our history, but our present situation is that we still get up basically with the sun, but we go to bed much later because of television and electric lights, and that as a result, human beings are chronically sleep deprived, and we've become so accustomed to it that we don't even realize that we are sleep deprived.
Absolutely, that's exactly what this talk is about.
Oh,
Because, it's not just light, but wavelengths of light can do certain things to us. And so in fact, in the earlier days when we would stay up by the candlelight or the incandescent bulb, it would do best to dysregulate our circadian rhythm. And we'd probably be able to sleep easier than under the energy efficient LED lights that we have right now.
the gentleness of that light. would help.
It's the wavelength of that light.
So when you were giving the quiz on, is which one's brighter and which one's not, after about the second one, I could have got them all right because the answer was don't trust your views, right? And so my question is when these artists do these paintings, are they trying to make it the same color, or is it just sort of, you think it's just like a natural instinct and it just ends up being, you know what I mean?
Definitely.
Can you repeat the question, please?
So your question is whether artists do what they do intuitively, instinctively, or whether they know what they do from a scientific perspective.
Yes.
They definitely do it intuitively, which is why they have to work on a piece of art a couple of times to get it right. And which is why someone like Monet experimented so much with colors. And which is why one sunrise is better than his other sunrises or sunsets. But like I said, the more masterful an artist, the more intuitively he's able to know what kind of physical response he wants to elicit out of you. So I don't know whether Monet really knew at that point of time about the older part of the visual cortex and the newer part of the visual cortex, where the older part could not see the sun and the newer part could see the sun. But he somehow managed to get the right hue so as to create that shimmering effect. Whereas we have artists nowadays who are more tuned into the scientific side of what's happening. And those artists are actually called CO artists because they kind of build a piece of art, not intuitively, but by thinking a lot and bringing different pieces in together to make sure it works in that way. So you have some bands like Sigur Rós, for example, that know what they're doing with their sound and their sound waves and frequencies. Anyone else?
My name is Sachin, and I'm going to be taking over from Adam. And what we're going to move to the second part of the talk, where we focus on how humans process media such as light and sound. So, what you just witnessed from Adam was ways in which light and sound convey very specific and very necessary information, and how they sort of define our sensory experiences. What I'm going to focus on is this sort of empty area in the middle. It sort of connects how we go from light and sound to the effect they have on our physiology. So it's kind of complex. There's the auditory and the visual system involved. We're going to go step by step and understand each and every one of these processes and how we finally get to how they impact our mood, our cognition, our sleep. Continuing from where Aaron left off, let's talk about the sleep deprivation issues faced by astronauts. So, as Aaron mentioned, that as they gaze into the observatory of the International Space Station, they witness 16 different sunrises and sunsets in a 24-hour period, which basically means they lack a definitive day-night marker. So obviously this has a tremendous health toll, leading all the way up to cognitive impairment, which given the sensitive nature of their work is absolutely unacceptable. So NASA has invested heavily in this perspective. They funded a lot of research to solve these issues. And in 2014, they spent $11.4 million to send light panels to the International Space Station, which project lights of different colors to sort of regulate the circadian rhythm of the astronauts. And I know most of this cost was probably transportation all the way to the International Space Station, but the fact that NASA would spend $11 million on lights would definitely make me think about light a lot more. So that's great for the astronauts. What about us? If you're wondering how this relates to you, just take a quick glance at your iPhone screen. I can see a lot of you are looking at it anyway. So. Apple did something new this year. In the update they released in March, they introduced this feature called night shift, which basically allows you to reduce or even eliminate the amount of blue light that your screen produces. Why did they do this? Is this helpful? How is it helpful? The answer to this question is sort of goes into the complex ways in which we perceive light, in which we process light, And beyond just image formation, there are several accessory visual processes. To begin with, when light enters your eye, it stimulates these rods and cones, which send signals to the retinal ganglion cells, which connected through the optic nerve. And these connections eventually result in the image that is in front of you, as the function of sight. However, a small percentage of these ganglion cells, and when I say small, I mean about 4 to 5%, these ones, they have a slightly different function. They can be excited by light directly. So they don't just pass on messages they receive, like these ones. They actually initiate them. It's these cells that Apple was interested in. So the retinal ganglion cells, which are intrinsically photosensitive, ones that are able to take the signal from light directly, they project to parts of the brain which are responsible for cognition, mood, and even emotions, such as the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the hypothalamus. One important structure in particular that they communicate with is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is responsible for maintaining your circadian rhythm. So it turns out that melatonin is one of the molecules that these retinal ganglion cells use to communicate with your suprachiasmatic nucleus to sort of induce sleep. And it turns out that blue and green light, research done at Harvard Medical School has shown that blue and green light inhibit this melatonin production. So when you're scrolling up and down Facebook, the last thing you do before sleeping, this blue and green light is preventing melatonin from being released, which is giving you wake-enhancing signals. And this is why Apple introduced night shift, to get rid of the blue light and sort of reduce and sort of prevent the suppression of melatonin production. So let's recap for a second. The light that you take in beyond image formation is able to impact your mood, your cognition, even your circadian rhythm. Sound, it turns out, is equally complex. We're all familiar with, how sounds such as musical passages, which are associated with major chords, sort of induce happy feelings. and musical passages which are heavy in like minor chords, they induce like sad emotions. But what we probably are not familiar with is that this music, like this passage, is even able to affect your heartbeat. Research has shown that musical sounds, musical passages are even able to control your heart rate variability. So how do we go from a sound such as this to the change in your heartbeat? Let's start with the beginning. So there are basically two ways to hear a sound. First, you have the classical hearing pathway. The sound goes, it vibrates your eardrum, stimulates the bones in the middle ear, and finally stimulates your cochlea. Alternatively, the sound can also vibrate your skull, which directly stimulates your cochlea. From the cochlea, the sound is transferred via the auditory nerve to the medial geniculate. Now, the medial geniculate acts as the primary relay station to get things to the auditory cortex. Now, this is where things get interesting, because the medial geniculate, the signals that are projected from the medial geniculate, they're also connected to the limbic system. Now, this is kind of an outdated term, but it basically includes structures that are responsible for controlling your blood pressure, your heart rate, your cognitive functions, and even your emotions. And a lot of these sounds are intentionally designed to sort of stimulate emotions, such as fear. Fear, in fact, is one of the most studied physiological outputs, with traceable neural pathways leading from a sound from your ear all the way to the amygdala. Now, sounds associated with fear get looped into your auditory cortex, to your amygdala, and even deep cortical and hypothalamic regions. So, it results in all these connections to this. Once you have a fearful sound,
Can you speak up, please?
once you have a fearful sound, this results in a release of adrenaline, a faster heartbeat, constriction of pupils, and even a dry mouth. Basically, this all adds to the dimensions of sound beyond just hearing. I hope I've sort of convinced you in terms of sound beyond just hearing. Maybe I'll make it a little more. One more system that I'd like to introduce is the vestibular system. It's sort of these structures behind your ear that is responsible for controlling your motion, your gravity, and sort of how you perceive your motion and your spatial relations. An interesting phenomenon that has been noticed is that people living next to wind farms have for some reason they have this motion sickness as compared to a lot of other people, and related symptoms. And the science behind this has shown that these low frequency sounds that are emitted by these wind turbines have sort of irregularly stimulated the vestibular system, which in itself has sort of caused these physiological effects like motion sickness and so on. So we'll get into the details of like intentionally stimulating the vestibular system in the next part of the talk. So basically, to sum up, what we've sort of gone from is light and sound, how these inputs have gotten all the way to the physiological outputs, and each and every system. We went past the visual system, where I highlighted the retinal ganglion cells, the ones that are photosensitive, and in the sound, where I highlighted the medial geniculate, which projects to the limbic and the vestibular system, and sort of adds more dimensions to how you process sound and light beyond just the hearing and the image formation. In the final part of the talk, we're going to, once we've understood how we process it, we go a step further. We try and understand how we can manipulate light and sound to sort of achieve favorable therapeutic outcomes, like regulating our sleep, sort of combating sleep disorders and mood disorders. Thank you. Any questions?
On the question of sound, what is it about the sound that changes your physiology? Is it the frequency? Is it the rhythm?
So each and every aspect.
Can you repeat the question, please?
So the question was, what is it about the sound that sort of affects your physiology? Each and every aspect, like you can say the frequency or the wavelength of the sound, or even the loudness, each and every aspect sort of has a lot of downstream processes associated. It's kind of a little bit more complex. I'd love to go into the details with you during the break and sort of explain in detail. But simply, like if you've understood it from the slide, it's beyond just the hearing process. It's how this sound gets transmitted to the various other structures in your brain, which is the limbic system, which has the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and the
That first set of notes that you played, that you said could reduce or could change blood pressure, was that, would it increase your blood pressure or would it decrease your?
that was actually, oh sorry, the question was the first set of notes that were played, how exactly would it affect your blood pressure? So that tone itself was a sort of a calming tone, music that was played more to like calm you down, sort of reduce your blood pressure. But again, it can go both ways. Like the frightening sound that I played was sort of aimed at increasing your heart rate, raising your adrenaline. So
What's the evolutionary advantage of this? Like, how could it like being affected by sound so much because like more and like able to survive like.
So the question was, what is the evolutionary advantage of having this knowledge, of understanding, of being more aware? So in fact, that is going to be the third part of the talk, where we talk about how we harness light and sound, how we use our awareness of the environment in terms of translating towards medical devices or anything where it's used to sort of achieve favorable outcomes. I've shown you how we can sort of stimulate emotions, how we can stimulate our mood, how we can change our sleep cycle. Now that we've understood how it works, we can tune the light and sound to sort of achieve these favorable outcomes.
But I can add on to that question. In my first part of the talk, like I explained, we all have the ability to actually identify absolute pitches, but we lose it through the creation of words and language. So we communicate through words rather than pitches. And other animals who don't have words have to have an ability of absolute pitch so that they can identify a particular call based on that pitch. So if you tune back into that sensitivity and pay attention to pitches, you'll know what a particular call in the jungle is. So in terms of hunting, you can tell the jungle calls by paying attention to the sounds that come out from there, if you are in tune with it. So even cultures that don't have a written language, but who sing songs which pass on orally from one generation to the next, use that song, they reproduce it in the same absolute pitch. And we don't. When we sing a pop song, we listen to it, we change the relative pitch because we are not so in tune to that. And we use words more than a particular sound.
So also to build on the question from earlier regarding the features of sound which are significant to your brain, it's not as if there's one feature. Your brain is able to capture all of these features. For example, the difference in time, the timing of a sound hitting your left ear versus your right ear, as well as the intensity, is used by your brain to determine where that sound came from in a horizontal plane or orientation around you. It's all of these elements come together within this, like in the transmission of the sound or your perception of that sound to touch all these downstream areas.
Do you think it's beneficial to use light or sound, or can you use them independently?
So the question was, do you think it's beneficial to use light or sound, or use them both?
Right.
So absolutely. Like in fact, what we sort of transition towards in our talk is we've actually been developing a device that sort of incorporates both light and sound, sort of tune our sleep cycles and sort of more other downstream applications. So definitely.
So is the blue light phenomenon common to all digital devices? Because I know like the National Sleep Foundation say you shouldn't have a TV in your bedroom, things like that. Is that for the same reason, or is there a different?
So the question was, is the blue light phenomenon common to all devices? Yes, absolutely. Research has shown that blue and green light, specific wavelengths, are able to change the melatonin levels in your brain, which would
will result in wake enhancing signals. That is the reason why. So stress on that.
So your TV, your computer, your phone, all of these things.
Yeah, we are still somewhat aware of what wavelengths do even about 50 years ago. Like I again mentioned in the first example, prior to having night vision goggles in the wars, they would use red light to navigate maps so that when they put up the red light, they could still see in the dark. If they used a green light, they wouldn't be able to see in the dark the moment they put it up.
Okay, if there are no further questions, we'll take our 10-minute intermission and reconvene. But during this time, feel free to ask our presenters further questions and get more clarification. Thank you.
I took a snap of you. I'm sitting like that. Like, what do you mean? I didn't know who was listening. I didn't know if he wanted to like tell you know what I'm saying? Like, I didn't know. And I didn't know until Monday.
Doing all right. Yeah. Can be better. What is the language? Yeah, so like if he, I don't know if he's here yet, but like the different like Hypnos, I guess it's the 4 of them that just has, and then there's 3 of them to do this one.
I just want to turn on this here.
I'll see.
That's enough. I don't think they do some of them. This other
Sorry, that's cute.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. So I guess I haven't been to enough space to know what the audience expectations was, but the talks that I've done, we can do that. And yes, we brought some props, but it's basically us. So my interpretation is that that's the okay. Like people research understood.
Okay, everyone, so we'll get started with the next portion of our talk. I just want to give you one more reminder about our handouts and flyers down here, as well as our feedback surveys. And please feel free to come talk to us after the lecture as well. Thank you.
Hi everyone, again I'm Thomas. So now that you've heard from Aaron about the richness of light and sound as media, and from Sachin about the ways humans process light and sound to impact their functions, let's talk a little bit about downstream applications of this kind of thing. And so, because these are biological cues, the most relevant mode of intervention seems to be medical. And in fact, earlier Aaron introduced the idea of using light and sound to modify circadian rhythms. Sachin took it further by talking about NASA's work as well as Apple's work on night shift. And so now let me introduce something bad for you. It's called sleep deprivation. Raise your hands if you got 8 or more hours of sleep last night. That's representative. So depriving yourself of sleep can reduce your function and worsen your health. It sabotages your circadian rhythm and it provokes your body's stress response. But in the modern day, we're more prone than ever, like this gentleman mentioned, we're more prone than ever to receive straight blue and green light exposure at night, which gives us instantaneous, wake-stimulating cues while we're trying to sleep. It also confuses your body's ability to distinguish between night and day neatly, as high light and low light settings. And looking at the big picture, 1/3 of Americans report having fallen asleep behind the wheel of a vehicle, which is a lot more than you would expect for that kind of statistic. So fortunately, scientists have been working on how to apply light and sound in ways that are therapeutic and corrective, not just damaging. Perhaps the most market relevant of these is Lumos, which is developed by two of Jamie Zeitzer's students at Stanford. Jamie Zeitzer is one of the most respected figures in circadian research and short phase light stimulation. So this mask which his students developed is meant to be worn during sleep. It's linked to a phone application in which you can select whether you sleep later or rise earlier. And then by providing increasing intensity of light stimulation as you approach the point of waking, this device reinforces the circadian cues which your body understands to place itself within a day-night cycle. On the auditory end, Seth Horowitz is a fantastic neuroscientist who's worked with NASA to develop an application that's available on the App Store. It's called Sleep Genius. It provides sound that's coupled with vestibular stimulation to provide auditory cues of the same nature. So to help individuals normalize their sleep-wake or their circadian patterns, but from an auditory perspective rather than from a visual. So we were looking at this and we're thinking like this is all well and great and all, but neither of these approaches, these approaches are first limited by the fact that they both rely on using one sense. So we developed something like this. We called it Hypnos, because while sleep is a very important aspect of your circadian rhythm, optimizing circadian function doesn't end with sleep. You should be able to be most aware when you wish to be, and most sleepy and when you wish to be as well. But so far, the interventions I've covered only correct sleep behaviors. So with 3 friends, I embarked on the design of this device, Hypnos, which could use light and sound processing pathways to induce a desired circadian state in an individual without drugs. Our manner of light stimulation imposes minimally on the wearer's vision or function, as it's ambiently delivered. So if you look at these 2 panes on the side here, our device, in our device format, light delivery is more consistent with the bottom pane than with the top one. Rather than the light's going directly into your eyes, it's more in a downcast direction by which your photosensitive retinal ganglion cells can receive light stimulation. It's also helped by the diffuse reflection off your facial features. Further, sound, we're attempting to deliver through bone conduction. As Sachin mentioned, there are 2 possible ways by which you can hear a sound. It either vibrates your eardrum when it's passed through the ear canal, or it vibrates your cranium, your skull. Whenever you're by a car that honks right next to you, you use both of these ways of hearing whether or not you realize it. Your skull shakes just as much as your eardrum passes the sound, but you just perceive both of these simultaneously. So we're interested in starting a first-round pilot trial with a modified form factor, actually 2 modified form factors, and the team consists of myself, Aaron, Sachin, Gabriel, who's also here as well, and our scientific advisor is Carolyn D'Ambrosio. She's an MD at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and she was previously the director of Tufts Sleep Research Division. So the device works like this. Basically, light and sound stimulation can be intermittently turned on and off as desired to evoke the appropriate circadian stimulus. So
introducing Hypnos,
this is our video.
a personal wearable device which produces audio-visual stimulation for sleep modulation. Our vision is to reduce human reliance on drugs and small molecules, as well as increase patient autonomy and governance over one's health. We introduce light minimally incident to the cornea, which transmits sound to the mastoid process while bone reproduction. There are 2 exciting features of our device which separate Hypnos from anything else currently existing with niche circadian program. From a technical perspective, the combination of light and sound stimulation in a personalized format has not yet been demonstrated. From a design perspective, delivered auditory and visual stimulation renders our device nearly invisible in a wire's field of view and leaves the ears free to perceive the environment. The application does not enter space. In fact, they only begin there. This device can be used with frequent travelers and other individuals who experience circadian dysregulation, as well as those simply seeking to improve the pleasure of the human experience, either through wake and corneal stimulation delivered in a completely natural way.
So now, what about beyond sleep? Because sure, light and sound do impact our circadian cycle, but they're not specific to it. So to answer this question, one company which has been making headway is Advanced Brain Technologies. Seth Horowitz is also a research scientist involved with Advanced Brain Technologies, And they've produced what's called the listening program with over 8,000 providers, licensed providers worldwide. Basically, these modified acoustic tracks are able to help people with a variety of mood and behavioral disorders, from autism spectrum disorder to Asperger's, to maintain normal function for various metrics. Some are for irascible behavior with ASD autism patients, other things like this. But there is significant research and many, many case studies that are on the website of Advanced Brain Technologies, which support this. One paper which I found really interesting, this is actually from the 90s, was one which talks about the usefulness of blue sunglasses in photosensitive epilepsy. The idea is that a patient who is photosensitive, or who is a photosensitive epileptic, by wearing blue sunglasses can shift the light which they're perceiving in a way that's less inflammatory to that which sets off a seizure for them. But when you think about it, what's really that novel about blue sunglasses, or really technologically, even Hypnos? We haven't built a new way to deliver light, we've just put it on your head. And from this perspective, this brings in the question of discovery versus application. Of course, our eyes should be turned towards the frontiers of science, and we should be really focused on what's going on in our research labs, what parts of the brain we're identifying, and all this kind of stuff. But there's a huge question of application as well. Only 2 years ago, a professor at Drexel University got a patent for a side mirror with no blind spot. How long have we known that mirrors can curve? So it's really a redundant question, but to take this point even further, Osram is one of the world's largest manufacturers of LEDs. They've carried out several very interesting studies in public schools in Ulm, Germany, using plane cabins and using hotels to change the lighting patterns of these settings and see how it impacts the attentiveness, the function, and the behavior of people in these settings. There's also a wealth of research that's been done more locally at Harvard Medical School, Brigham and Women's Hospital. Also at MGH, there have been a lot of leaders in short-phase light simulation and circadian research. Dr. Ciesler is the director of sleep medicine here at Harvard Medical School. But another notable scientist, for example, is Stephen Lockley. He has a particularly fun job on the side in that he's working with Mercedes to help develop circadian rhythms for their race car drivers. Because if they're off by a little bit or whatever, the sensitivity is amplified when it's a competition which comes down to fractions of a second. Just consider that for a second. But at the end of the day, designers, scientists, and engineers interact with the environment to tweak a fixed pool of resources into meaningful ideas. And while some of these innovations might happen with a device, some might happen with a drug, some might happen with a new therapeutic approach, but the most significant medical decisions we make are the ones we make on an everyday basis. So everyone determines their own sensory environment. Everyone determines, to some extent, what they eat, what, And so I guess the thought that I want to leave this talk with is, how can you use light and sound to engineer your life in a better way? Thank you. Any questions?
How uncomfortable is your device when you're sleeping?
Good question. So the question is, how uncomfortable is the device to wear? I've worn this device for the better part of 12 hours during the 24-hour period of the hackathon for which we initially built it. I had it on my head. We were taking all kinds of photos, videos, media. We were also trying to work the LEDs within our 3D printed prototype in different ways. And so we had it on 3 different people's heads of different sizes, which we noticed by the tension in the headband. But no one complained of discomfort or anything like that. It's also very lightweight, although 3D printing would not be a way to mass manufacture.
Also, his question was, how uncomfortable is it to wear while sleeping? And you don't wear it while sleeping, you wear it for a few minutes after you wake up and for a few minutes before you go to sleep.
Okay.
So the idea is, imagine being at work and feeling an afternoon slump. Instead of having a cup of coffee, you could put on this device for 5 to 10 minutes, receive a focused program of light and sound stimulation, and then return to work. This is a practice which is anecdotally reported among many night shift nurses, which when the lights are dimmed on the patient floors, they'll return to the central desk areas where there's more sound, light, and activity for about 10 minutes every hour so that they can recharge before continuing on their shift. So there's also, I mentioned Jamie Zeitzer earlier in the talk, there's also some interesting work done by him with regards to short phase light stimulation. He's shown that 10 microsecond pulses of light are more effective at generating biological responses than a steady beam of that light, by up to 8 times magnitude if you want to quantify how much melatonin suppression is achieved.
So does this work for seasonal affective disorder as well?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question. So the question was, does this work for seasonal affective disorder? And yes, there are remedies which are available in simpler forms. You can buy lights which are bright, which you can put in your environment or in your room, for example, to add extra illumination to counteract the fact that seasonally there's reduced luminosity outside.
But does your device with that counteract?
So our device is really a medium by which to provide this light and sound stimulation. The desires, all of that can be programmed into it. It's more, whereas all of the devices I talked about prior target sleep as the endpoint, this is meant for kind of holistic circadian, like the entire circadian rhythms optimization. So both your sleep and your wake, which if you have seasonal affective disorder, if you notice that you are affected by lower light settings, you can ideally go into the application and check a box, and your device will register that.
Yes. Does your device have sort of 5 different settings that you run, or do you have some kind of biofeedback?
So at the moment we haven't, the software is a little less developed, the hardware is more developed, and that's what we would be interested in putting through the pilot trials. Whatever functions are shown to be significant by this pilot trial could then be better structured, pruned, and all of that, and be turned into finished programs.
And do you expect people to manually set 5 different settings, or do you just
ideally you should be able to push I want to wake up a lot right now or something of that nature, and that should do it.
And it was conceptualized as a solution for NASA, where they anyway take out a lot of readings from the astronauts who are wired from head to foot. So that would be integrated with the machine learning aspect, in which there is no manual input, but personalized feedback, which tunes the program to that individual. Now, over here on Earth, we are not usually strapped on with feedback systems which gauge our metrics, although it's starting to happen with things like Hypnos. So the more advanced the technologies get, which are able to take up markers from your body without being too intrusive, and it gets mixed in with the machine learning aspect so as to change the program based on how you're affecting that program without a manual input required.
Thank you. So please feel free to stick around for a closer discussion with the team members if you'd like over the device design, hurdles we have left to overcome for this to be finished product, and so on. Thank you. So we are going on this Yeah, I was going to say last week.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, I was like, oh no, weird stuff. What's good? But I think no worries. It was, it all came together at the end. I think. We'll have like, it's like all the equipment, like the reason Katie was so insistent on like repeating the questions. Eventually, we'll have a nice, like, edited video of you guys with, like, the speaker in focus, the audio track, and also, I was like, kind of the slide.
Like when I walked in, I was like, did you see me?
And from there, basically, she's everyone one person. So it's you can make and all the speakers are running these. It's just you have to get all of that
I just need to see. Like, I remember this is not. It's like